Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. I'm Finn,
I'm Carl.
and today we are going to be getting very philosophical again. So, last time I was talking about a few lessons that I had learnt in some books, and this time Cal has done some reading and has a nice philosophical discussion topic for us.
Exactly. And how we can relate it to language. So, this book I read by Albert Camus he's a French philosopher from the 1900s, and he wrote a book called The Outsider. It's very short. It's translated from French, and the English is quite simple, so I would recommend it. And it's a really interesting book, and it talks about the idea of a certain philosophy of accepting things as the way they are and living life in spite of it. So one of his later essays was about the myth or the myth of Sisyphus, which is that famous image, right, Finn, of the guy pushing a boulder up a hill.
Yeah, real big rock, a nice round rock or boulder, just endlessly pushing and pushing.
Yeah, exactly. So even if you haven't heard the reference, you'll surely have seen the image of a man pushing a boulder up a huge boulder up a mountain. And it's from Greek mythology, and he was punished in the afterlife to forever be bound pushing a ginormous rock up a hill. And Camus, the author of this book, wrote about this and said he says that it was a myth that this was a punishment and that he was suffering forever, because he said there is beauty in it, in accepting. And he said he not only accepted that he was to do this every day, but he woke up each day and enjoyed in spite of it and grinned instead of at the absurdity of it. And now you might be thinking, how on earth are they going to relate this to English? But
Trust us, we can.
we'll get there. And well, it made me think. So learning a language can sometimes feel like this, right? It can sometimes feel like pushing a big boulder up a never ending hill. And especially when that boulder and the peak of that hill represents fluency. But we have two things to say about fluency, don't we, Finn?
Yeah, well, number one is that we just hate it, really. Yeah, well, personally, I do. Anyway, I think fluency is almost a myth. If we're talking about myths and this story, then the word fluent or fluency, it just means something different to every single person. And a lot of English learners, well, any language it applies to, but we see a lot with English learners that they want to achieve fluency, they want to be fluent, and that they will be happy when they are fluent. But in their eyes, fluent means 100% fluent. They can understand absolutely everything. They can say absolutely everything they want to. And their accent is exactly like a British accent, whatever a British accent actually is.
Exactly. And so if the top of the mountain for you represents 1,000% fluency, you're going to be pushing that boulder forever, and it's going to get you down. You're not going to feel encouraged. But if you accept that fluency is something different to every single person, one person might say, oh my gosh, you're fluent. Someone else might have a bit of trouble understanding you. If you accept that fluency doesn't maybe exist, or B, it's way too loose of a term, then if you accept that, then you can enjoy the process of learning a language. You can accept and kind of take the little victories when you use and enjoy and remember a new word or have a great conversation with someone, and not be demoralized when sometimes you forget a thing or two.
Yeah, and this is actually reminding me of a podcast episode I listened to earlier. So Modern Wisdom, which is Chris Williamson, who I talk about quite a lot. I have a little bit of a man crush on him, and he was talking to Piers Morgan, who is a very how do we even describe this? Many people have many strong opinions about Piers Morgan, whether they really like him, whether they don't. And he is really famous for debating and pushing people on certain topics and drawing out a lot of big, important debates with different people, whether it's politicians or, I guess, activists, that sort of thing.
Yeah, he's a controversial figure.
Yeah, and what he was saying, he spoke quite a bit towards the end of the podcast about what we were talking about last week with the controlling the controllables. And one thing he said was that if you're in a situation that you can't, this is not word for word, this is, please don't quote me directly on this, but the gist was that if you're in a bad situation that you can't control, then you might as well just shut up and enjoy it, because you can't do anything about it, which is essentially the angle you were coming from with Matey Boy and his big rock.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you've summed up Camus' absurdism in a few sentences, but it's the same train of thought, right? If you can't control things and you can't control life, then just accept it, and then you can maybe find some freedom or enjoyment from it. I've accepted that I will never reach this, that there is no such thing as 1,000% fluency, and I've accepted that I won't reach it. And there is now, I remember when I was spending 6 months in Brazil, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. There was, because I had 6 months and I felt I had a restraint of time to achieve my goals. And I didn't stop learning Portuguese when I went back to the UK. The process continued, and I was surprised when I came back that after maybe a week of readjusting, I kind of picked up where I left off. And so realizing that this 1,000% goal isn't a thing kind of takes a weight off your shoulders, and you can just enjoy each kind of victory. You can smile through each little setback. And the other thing was, we were talking about fluency being a moving target, right? Because language is always changing, and people you speak to are always varied. There's however many millions of English speakers in the world, right? And they all have different accents, they'll all have different slang, they'll all have different like regional dialects. So it's always going to be a moving target. So I think accepting this will free you up quite a lot just to enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, and I guess one tip or trick is to really figure out what your goal is, what you want to achieve. Do you want to be able to communicate effectively in meetings at work? Do you want to be able to watch films and understand lots of different accents? Do you want to just be able to have a conversation with people? So I've actually been having classes with one of our club members for Spanish. Well, I don't really want to call them classes because she's not teaching me anything. It's literally just have a conversation. That's all I want. I don't even look at the vocabulary afterwards. It's good to see them in real time, but then I'm never looking at those words again. And some people need to write the words down, remember them, study them. But for me, my goal is literally just to have a conversation with someone in an informal, casual way. So yeah, instead of trying to achieve this 100% exact mastery or fluency, as people call it, just figure out what it is that you want and improve at that.
Yeah, that's a really great point about the vocabulary. So I have a friend here who's learning Portuguese. She's English, and she avoids conversation quite a lot. But one thing she does do is compile a huge list of vocabulary and just try and commit it to memory instead of applying it in conversation regularly. And it's almost as if in her mind she's going to try and just remember the language and then apply it all at once, which is not how it works. You have to always be applying it, consuming it. But for me, I get a real buzz, a real kick out of hearing a word, figuring it out from the context, or maybe asking for confirmation about its meaning, and then just using it, chucking it out there again, in the next conversation. And I get a real buzz from that. And I think a lot of language is recycling and repeating, and you don't necessarily need to get too concerned about the real detail.
Yeah, rinse and repeat. So rinse means when you rinse something with water to just get rid of the dirt or the mess or leftover food, whatever it might be, or soap after you've washed up. But we also say if you rinse something, you just do it, or you use it until there is none left, or it's broken, or you just can't do it anymore. So rinse and repeat with the conversations. And I think with vocabulary, and people do the same thing with grammar that you were describing about your friend. And I think what I always found quite funny with Portuguese, studying it at uni, they would teach us the officially correct grammar structures, and then you get to Brazil and it's like, what what are you saying? That is not how we learn to have the conversation, but it's how everyone speaks. And you've just got to be like, well, okay, that's how I technically want to speak, so I need to forget spending hours poring over grammar notes and speak.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of speaking to native speakers. If you've listened to the podcast a few times, you're probably sensing that I'm about to start talking about how good our conversation classes are. But it's just, yeah, I think often in our conversation classes, it comes up, someone asks a grammar question, and we debate and think about it and say, yeah, I guess that is grammatically incorrect, but everyone says it and no one would ever think twice about you saying that. That would sound perfectly normal to me as a native speaker. And that's the benefit of having...
Oh, sorry.
Go on. No,
Yeah,
go on.
or vice versa as well. If something, yeah, that is technically correct, but we don't really say that. We just kind of word it completely differently, and we kind of say it like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the benefit of having a native speaker to kind of check with and regularly converse with. And just through conversing regularly, you'll just pick up, you'll absorb the kind of more natural collocations, more natural phrases and vocabulary that they use. And it's a really valuable thing, I think.
Yeah, and studying and poring over your notes is just repetition. It's just seeing it again and again, trying to memorize it again and again. But when you have a real conversation, then that is repetition. You're being exposed to the same phrases over and over again, and automatically you are hearing the most commonly used phrases. So that's how you know whether it's worth remembering or not, because somebody says it 10 times in a day and it's like, oh, okay, I need to remember that word. I keep forgetting that word. I'm going to remember that word or that structure.
That's such a good point, actually. Yeah, because 1,000 times, I'm sure there's a billion hits on Google for people searching most commonly used phrases or most commonly used verbs in whatever language. And that's such a great point. If you just chat with 5 people 10 times a day, then you're going to hear very quickly the most commonly used words, and they're going to be the ones that you remember with no need for trying to write them down and memorize them. They will naturally be the ones that you hear and remember because you will have to understand and use them. So that's a really nice point.
Yeah, and that's one of the main reasons we started this podcast, so that, yeah, we have the conversation classes where we provoke conversation from other people, but then we are exposing you to how we speak and the phrases we use, and having the transcript with the comments, the annotated transcript, is just a great way to follow along and see to the side what those words mean. You either understand it or you don't, and if you don't, there is probably a definition for it.
Exactly. And I think listening for gist, general meaning, context is a really good skill to develop anyway.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, before we plug the club anymore and spend all day doing it, taking up all of your precious time, then we should probably round up here.
Yeah, happy days.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yeah,
thank
you very much. Been a pleasure as always. Bye-bye.
See you later.